Hi, I'm Keith Porter, Principal of SPA Risk LLC, a Colorado corporation specializing in engineering risk management for natural disasters. I was the principal investigator of Natural Hazard Mitigation Saves and its case study, Portland Resilient Runway Benefit Cost Analysis. I'll take about 12 minutes to summarize that case study and offer some lessons for the Resilient Road Roundtable. This is the project team. NIBS, the National Institute of Building Sciences, managed the project. I led the technical development and estimated many of the benefits. George Washington University and University of Southern California estimated business interruption. CISA, the Oregon Office of Emergency Management, University of Colorado Boulder, and the state of Oregon did peer review. And we also thank reviewers from the Port of Portland. Here's my thesis. We should set design objectives for transportation infrastructure based on the costs and benefits to society, whose stake in our infrastructure can dwarf the capital maintenance and repair costs for that infrastructure. If we do that, we may find that resilient design of transportation infrastructure can be far more efficient than design to minimize first costs. Here's the problem statement that the Port of Portland posed to the National Institute of Building Sciences in mid-2020. The port asked NIBS, it's going to cost $140 million plus some soft costs to remediate liquefaction on the south runway highlighted here. What is the benefit? Or at least, what's the benefit that we can express in monetary terms? I'll give you the details momentarily, but our answer to the port was it saves over $7 billion and produces a benefit cost ratio in excess of 50 to 1. The cost, again, was over $140 million, the benefit about $7.2 billion. Most of those benefits had little to do directly with PDX, the Portland International Airport. And incidentally, we estimated several benefit categories for the first time, the ones that are outlined in red here. The familiar ones that I haven't outlined are $1.2 billion in business interruption losses avoided and $4 million in reduced repair costs. The new ones are $5.7 billion saved because building safety inspectors can arrive in the Willamette Valley to get people back into safe homes and workplaces quickly. $460 million in life safety benefits from being able to use PDX for medevac, and $170 million in national defense benefits because the Oregon Air National Guard can't fulfill its mission without that runway operating. All of these benefits are expected present value, accounting for how likely various sized earthquakes are and discounting for how far in the future they might occur. Let me briefly explain how a benefit cost analysis works when we're talking about future losses in uncertain future disasters. First, we define the assets at risk. We perform a hazard analysis, meaning we estimate how frequently and how severely nature impacts those assets. In the next stage, the vulnerability analysis, we estimate the severity of impacts given each of many levels of hazard. Then, in the damage analysis, we do some integral calculus and convolve the assets, the hazard, and the vulnerability to estimate probabilistic damage. In the loss analysis, we convert that damage to monetary terms. And then we account for probabilities, discount rates, and when the earthquake could occur, and we estimate the present value of future loss under as-is conditions and under what-if conditions. The benefit is the avoided future loss under the what-if conditions. Divide that benefit by the cost, and you get the benefit cost ratio. The higher the benefit cost ratio is above 1.0, the more desirable the investment. Here's how we applied that process to PDX's question. We performed 100 simulations of each of 5 earthquakes of various magnitude and likelihood. They're shown here. The 5 are shown here. To estimate the safety benefits, we estimated damage to buildings in the Willamette Valley from each of those earthquakes and how many people would be seriously hurt and urgently need hospital care over and above what the region can normally supply in terms of unoccupied intensive care unit and emergency department beds. We assume that medevac could save 2/3 of those lives. We multiply that by the US government's acceptable cost to avoid a statistical fatality, and then assign about half that value to the airport and half that value to the caregivers. And we only take credit for the airport operating. Some relevant statistics for that analysis. Because of the age and vulnerability of Oregon's buildings, tens of thousands of people could be injured, of whom 2,400 will die without treatment in an intensive care unit or an emergency department. But normally there are only 360 vacant ICU or ED beds. For regulatory purposes, the U.S. Department of Transportation would be willing to spend $10.2 million to avoid each of those statistical excess deaths, or $4 million to avoid each statistical non-fatal injury. And that means that each avoided death that comes from one of those injuries saves $6.2 million per serious injury that is successfully treated. The biggest benefit category comes from the fact that landslides and bridge damage could prevent building safety experts from arriving after the earthquake, at least by road, potentially for weeks. During that time, buildings with scary looking damage can't be used unless those experts can arrive by air at PDX. After we estimate shaking and building damage, we estimate the time it takes for those experts to arrive without a resilient runway, that is, waiting for the roads to be repaired. And then again, with the resilient runway. And then we multiply the delay in tagging by the daily value of the loss of use. The region has a lot of older vulnerable buildings, disproportionately where vulnerable populations live. Cascadia Subduction Zone, or CSZ earthquake, could damage up to 850,000 buildings out of 2.9 million in the area. Most of those, 610,000, can be safely reoccupied despite the scary looking damage. But the Portland Metropolitan Statistical Area only has 180 certified safety evaluators. They can't handle all 610,000 evaluations that would need to be done. But the rest of the United States has almost 11,000 certified evaluators. They could do that. They could do it relatively quickly, but they have to be able to arrive in the Willamette Valley. Moving on to business interruption, we use standard input-output economic analysis to estimate business interruption benefits from having an operating runway. I'll skip the details of that analysis. And avoided property losses are trivial. The resilient runway provides an expected present value of $4 million in benefits from reduced repair costs. That's far too little to justify spending above $140 million. Here's a pie chart on the left, or in the middle of this picture, to illustrate those savings. I omit the national defense benefits. The little gold slice on the right is the cost to scale. The 50-to-1 benefit cost ratio is a lower bound because it omits a number of benefits. It, first of all, assigns too little value to avoiding the disproportionate harm that earthquakes cause to disadvantaged people because they lack resources to protect themselves after the earthquake. It assigns no monetary value to the psychological trauma associated with being cut off from friends and family outside the Willamette Valley. The $7.2 billion figure also omits the $200 million in national defense value because national defense as a value was considered to be so controversial by PDX. And we haven't talked about the benefits of tax revenue stability or response and recovery costs, and there are probably other benefits that we haven't even identified here. Because we're talking about public expenditures, it's important to note how public and widespread the benefits are. A resilient runway benefits everyone, making us all safer and more connected. Anyone in the region could need medevac or have scary looking damage to their home or workplace. And because no man or woman is an island, especially in a global economy, The whole nation benefits from a stable economy, a stable tax base, lower public response and recovery costs, and a greater sense of safety and connectedness. To return to my thesis, I said that I would show you that society's stake in its transportation infrastructure can dwarf the capital costs. I showed you that a resilient runway saves PDX $1.2 billion, but it saves the rest of society 5 times as much, $6 billion. That matters to our design philosophy. Our design philosophy often evaluates the efficiency of public infrastructure by the cost to build and maintain it. I argue that public infrastructure is efficient when society pays the least for it, not when its government caretakers do. And I think I've showed that resilient transportation infrastructure can be far more efficient than least first cost design. If we want a resilient PDX runway, we're going to have to pay $140 million now. But that expenditure can be made deliberately and predictably. If, on the other hand, we go for least first cost design, we ignore future losses, and we wouldn't do a resilient runway, but we don't avoid those future losses just because we're ignoring them. Here, we estimate that those future losses at over $7.2 billion. So some cost is inevitable. The earthquake will come whether we design for it or not. It will just cost a lot more if we don't. Thanks for your attention. Watch the chat box for URLs to the report, a 6-page summary, and a 1-page fact sheet. Thanks very much.